Hey everybody, and welcome to another Chairman of the Board ranking video. This is where I take a look at the last 5 new to me board games and I rank and review them in order of preference. Now I've got a good mix here with some heavy Euros and some party games and even a co-op game. But before I get into the games, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer. And if you use the link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. At number 5, I have Peacemakers, Horrors of War. So this is the newest game from the Peacemakers line, and the first of which that I've played. Now, I've not played any of the previous deck builders. And this one does, however, keep the same theme, where you are kind of a neutral party of these kind of woodland critters, and you are trying to intercept this ongoing war between different factions to try and kind of demotivate them to continue fighting. So you are kind of being the peacemakers and trying to stop anybody from dying. So I like the way that the game is tackled, or that theme of war is tackled from a different angle, and it's quite a creative concept. Now, this is not a deck builder like the previous ones, but it is still card driven, and the way that each round or the game is broken down is pretty simple, where you and your teammates, because this is completely cooperative, will use these decks of cards, or these cards in your hand, to do different things. So you have like movement, you can barricade around certain troops to protect them from, from attacks. You can spy on the warring factions deck to make sure that you know what's going to happen. Or you can use the card for the unique ability on the card as well, which will kind of give you different tricks you can do to manipulate the state of play. Now, once you've played your cards, the armies will resolve their actions, and each army has 2 decks, which will show what they do and the speed in which they do it. And this can be really important because certain events will affect other events. So, for example, one faction might attack, but if the other faction kind of blocks or takes cover before they attack, then they're going to mitigate that attack and take less damage. So it's quite cool how the initiative system works. In fact, it's very creative, and there's even ways you as the players can kind of tip the different factions off to try and make them act faster and so on. The way you win the game is that you are trying to demotivate each of the factions to a certain kind of parameter on this track, and if at the end of the round their motivation is in a certain zone, then you'll win the game. But if one faction gets demotivated too quickly, then the other faction will win and you as the players will lose. Now, I suppose my biggest takeaway from this game is that combat system. I think it's super cool. There's some cool like cascading things that can happen and some good manipulation you can do, as you can swap cards around and put them at the bottom of the deck so you know what's coming up, as you'd expect with these kind of co-op games. And again, I do like that concept of kind of sitting in the distance, watching things play out and trying to just, turn this little screw here or there to try and manipulate the situation to your benefit. That being said, I do think you need to go into this game prepared that sometimes you will not be doing a lot, because you might have the board state exactly as you want it, and the best thing for you to do is to do nothing. So it kind of feels like you're a true fly on the wall and just not really playing and letting the game play you, and intervening just at the right times. And sometimes doing that thing isn't much at all. So it can be a little bit plodding at times, and you can wait for the game to play out, and sometimes that can even work without much intervention at all. So again, the pacing is a little bit weird with this one. I'm not saying it's bad, and it's certainly an interesting concept, but be prepared for some lulls in play where you don't need to do much, but some rounds where you need to truly intervene and really protect someone or do something to foil one of the faction's plans. You have 6 different scenarios here, all with a different landscape and different factions fighting each other. Different cards come into play and so on. So there's some good replayability here, and you can definitely go back and revisit the old scenarios you have played, because every time it's going to play out differently. All in all, I like the concept, I think, more than I like the game itself. That being said, please do take my comments with a grain of salt, because co-op games generally don't work for me. I prefer competitive games, but I thought this was such a fresh take on the co-op genre that I wanted to at least give it a try. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to like this one. But if you have kind of, itchy feet and you like to jump straight into a game and maybe you aren't the most patient of people, this one might not be for you, because sometimes again it does feel like a simulation and two automas basically fighting each other, because it is that. Yeah, that might not be for you if you don't like the idea of that, but if you want, again, a different style of co-op games with some good little sneaky things you can do, then I would give this one a look, especially if you have maybe a younger family. I mean, the gameplay is still quite gamey, but it's got a lovely visual design. The meeples are gorgeous looking, it's very charming artwork, great table presence, I have to say that. And some really dynamic combat systems, which unfortunately you're not directly involved in, but still interesting to see how it plays out. So, game where objectively and from a distance I can see it's really clever, but is it one that I'm going to go really deep on and keep going back to? I don't think so, sadly, because I just want to be more involved on a personal level. So that is Peacemakers Horrors of War at number 5. At number 4, I have Hitster. So this is an extremely light party game where you are trying to put these different songs from history in order in terms of when they were originally released. So this is pretty much a carbon copy of a game like Timeline, if you're familiar with that one, but instead of historical events, you are doing, again, pop songs or rock songs and so on. I think the fun factor is amplified with this game because in order to discover which song you're doing, you're actually scanning in a QR code which will actually play the song out loud, so everybody can kind of sing along and join in. And it does, again, it increases the energy levels and makes it a much more fun experience rather than more taxing one. But you know, if you like your music trivia and you want to be tested, then this is a good example of that. Anybody can play it. You can play in groups. It can tailor to a lot of people. So it is what it is, really. You know, you can fully understand what this game is just by my brief explanation here, but it works. And you know, I generally like that Timeline idea anyway. I like the original Timeline. This is just a slight spin on that. So that is Hitster at number 4. At number 3, I have another party game with sides. So this is more of a traditional word association game, and I tend to like word games. I have a lot of them in my collection. This one is a bit more of a mass market feel, as you are trying to get the person in the hot seat to guess the correct word by giving clues. The twist on this one, though, is that you have these this row of cards, and you can only give clues associated to the letters on the extremities on that row of cards. So, you know, if you have a really good clue but you want to use the letter T, you can't do that until you might use the letter C or D, and so on. And you're trying to be as efficient as you can. Try and give the best clues in as few letters as possible. Extremely versatile, very approachable. You know, you can teach this to anybody, you know, elderly family members, younger family members, and so on. So it does, again, have that real broad approach where you can play with absolutely anybody. But it works for what it is. You know, again, I personally like these styles of games. It worked well for my family at Christmas. So if you want an easy to pick up and play party game, then Sides is a good option. So that is Sides at number 3. At number 2, I have Black Forest. So Black Forest, the newest Uwe Rosenberg game, and if you've watched my channel over the year or ever watched any of my videos about my games collection, you might know that I have pretty much no Uwe Rosenberg's games in my collection, with the odd exception, and those exceptions are not the farming simulator style games that he's most known for. So I have played a lot of them, but none of them have really worked for me. One of them that did kind of sit on that borderline of me keeping it or not keeping it was Glass Road. Now, I really like Glass Road, especially that resource system where whenever you gain certain basic resources, you will automatically generate the more kind of luxury resources. And when I heard that mechanism was coming back in a new game, Black Forest, that really did pique my interest, especially when the rest of the game was kind of built from the ground up and was built on more traditional Euro concepts rather than the card-driven concepts of Glass Road, which I thought was cool, but I thought it was a little bit gimmicky and didn't really stand up to repeated plays. I found it a little bit too experimental. This one, again, more of a traditional Euro style game, as you are moving around this map with your worker, visiting different people on this map, getting resources, converting resources, building buildings, all the Euro-y goodness that I tend to enjoy. Now, the game itself, I think, is really well done. I think it's a polished game, as you'd expect with a designer like Uwe Rosenberg. I thought the actual main worker movement board was really cool, as you know, you are spending provisions in order to move from town to town, so you're trying to plan your routes efficiently as not to waste anything. You can even manipulate the board state by moving different kind of traders to different locations to try and suit you. There's a race to get certain kind of contracts done. So again, lots of traditional Euro things that I tend to like, and I thought that was executed really well. Much like the original Glass Road, I really enjoyed that resource wheel, where you want to very meticulously get the right resources, because again, you do automatically generate the luxury resources, which can actually ruin your plans if you're not careful. Loved all of that. There was one thing that I found a little bit clunky though, or maybe not clunky, more overwhelming, and that was the sheer variety of options here. Now, I know that some people will look at that or hear that and think, excellent, there's so much you can do here, and that is true, but I found it a little bit daunting and a little bit too much to take in, because I think every single game here you have like, I don't know, 50 buildings or something. You've got some big ones as well as a ton of the smaller ones. They are kind of organised in a way that you can break it down into the different resources, but there is a lot of cross-contamination, and what I found myself doing a lot of the time was just collecting random stuff and then looking at the resource board and then building whatever I could build rather than working towards something. So I felt that this game lacked a little bit of direction. I think it would have been better if there was maybe round by round objectives or something you can try and go for to get some bonus points, just to put you on the rails a little bit. I found it a little bit too sandboxy and just too many kind of conversion tiles where you could turn this into this, into this, into this. Again, I like the idea of that, but in practice it was like, oh, I don't know, just pick one of them and hopefully it will work out. There are some good different strategies you can go here, as you can focus on, you know, really densely populating your player boards or keeping them bare. Again, lots of different ways you can get points, but again, I found the points a little bit minor. It felt like you're doing a lot of work for very few points in return. And all in all, again, despite me objectively liking a lot of things that went on here, I found the game a little bit too meandering and a bit too plodding, and just lacking that little bit of drive and that little sense of urgency that I would have liked to have seen, and what I tend to enjoy in a lot of other Euros. This one was just a little bit too foot off the gas, and just hopefully things will work out and so on. So maybe I'm just really bad at this. Maybe, well, it seems to be a running theme with Uwe Rosenberg games. I just find them, I don't know, they just don't gel with my playstyle too much, and this is sadly another example of that, despite me thinking it would be the polar opposite. Just, again, too many things going on in terms of these buildings, and it feels like you're pulling teeth in order just to get a very small amount of points in return for that. Now, that being said, I'm sure if you like Uwe games, then you're going to get a lot from this one, because it is a solid design objectively. It's just one that didn't quite work for me, and even the people I played it with actually agreed with me, so maybe it's not just me saying that. And if you are tried and tested in terms of playing Uwe and enjoying Uwe games, then you'll like this one. If you don't, then I don't think this is the one to change your mind. So again, objectively a good game, but just one that's not right for me. That is Black Forest at number 2. And finally, at number 1, and the only game this episode to get a commendation, is Civolution. So Stefan Feld, kind of the polar opposite of Uwe Rosenberg to me. Almost all of his games gel with me. You know, they fit like a glove, because I tend to like the way that he thinks and designs games. This one kind of borrows a lot from his other games, but it's a much more grandiose, more ambitious design with much more going on. As the name of the game would suggest, this is kind of a civilization game, or civilization game I should say, where you are improving your technology as you go, and this game certainly has that. But it is more built on the foundation of, you know, Euro trappings, dice manipulation, moving around the map, spawning new troops, controlling areas, this kind of thing, rather than those traditional civilization style games. So as I said earlier, this one does borrow a lot from other Steffenfeld games. For example, the main driving system of the game is dice, which works a lot like the dice system in the Castles of Burgundy, but instead of using one die, in this one you're always using a pair of dice to activate a particular action. You have like 20 odd actions here, like 25 actions or so, that you can take, and that sounds a lot, and it is a lot, but when you actually play it, it's not too bad because all the actions broken down are very logical and easy to resolve. For example, move your tribes around, or create a new tribe, or play a card. They're all pretty simple on what you can do, but it's the magnitude and the sheer buffet of options that you have at any time that makes this really crunchy. And I don't want to undersell it in terms of just being broad in terms of your decisions. The actual layers of the gameplay here is really rich as well, because you need to prioritize things at the right time, because you have end of round objectives that can give you huge benefits if you beat your opponents to them. But also each game is going to have a different kind of ratio or return on different strategies that you take in terms of the return of points you get by following those particular strategies. So tons of variability here. I love the way you can tailor your engine to do different things, and maybe this game you want to be really good at exploring. Next game you could be really good at hunting, and so on. So you are spinning a lot of plates here, but I like the way that you can't do everything at all times. You need to best utilize the dice that you've rolled. Now, one of the main criticisms you'll get from this game is that for such a heavy game and complex game, you are pigeonholed by the dice that you've rolled. And yes, that is true, but if you are in that position for a lot of the game, then you have kind of done that yourself, because you always have an option to take these idea tokens, which essentially work as your workers, like in the Castles of Burgundy, that lets you mitigate the dice to what you want them to be. You could take these place markers that can act as basically dummy dice. So there's lots of mitigation tools here. And every time I've seen anybody sulk about this game not going their way, it's always because they failed to take those mitigation tools as an option, because they see that as a wasted move, where in reality that's a great move to make, because they've just saved themselves making several suboptimal moves in the future. Again, so much to talk about here. This one, when I first played it, I liked it a lot, but of course you're still getting to grips with things and seeing what happens when you pull certain buttons or push certain buttons. The more I've played this one, the more I'm starting to really appreciate the layers of gameplay here. Just the amount of different ways you can tackle it is fascinating. And for such a complex game, it is remarkably smooth and easy to play. Now, I taught this one recently to my girlfriend, who's basically dipping her toe into board games, and she had a great time with it and managed to get to grips quite quickly. Apologies for the siren there. So yeah, this one I had very, very high hopes for, and this one lived up, maybe even exceeded my expectations, and is definitely one of my favourite games of the year, and one of my favourite Steffenfeld games, which is saying something. So that is Civolution at number 1. So there we have it. That concludes the video. A nice variety of games here. Hopefully you found some value in this. If you have, please hit like and subscribe to the channel, and check out my other content too. And for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.